The war had already ended when Elia's row found the sword. The sky over the ruined city burned a dull red, filled with smoke and drifting ash. Broken towers leaned against each other like tired giants, and the ground was covered with metal, stone, and bodies. Alien ships hovered in the distance, their dark shapes blocking the stars. The Varkesh Dominion had won. They always did. Elias moved carefully through the wreckage, stepping around shattered armor and fallen weapons. He was not a soldier. He had never been one. He wore a simple gray field jacket with no markings, only a small medical patch stitched to the sleeve. He had stayed behind after the fighting for one reason only, to recover the dead. Humans were allowed to do that. The Varkesh saw it as useless work, something beneath them. They believed the dead had no value once honor was taken from the battlefield. Elias believed differently. He knelt beside a fallen resistance fighter, human, young, barely more than a boy. Elias closed the boy's eyes and pulled a thin metal tag from his neck. He slipped it into a pouch at his side. Another name to record. Another family that would never get answers. That was when he saw the blade. It lay half-buried beneath a slab of black stone, its hilt exposed. The sword was long and narrow, forged from a metal that did not reflect light like steel. Even covered in dust and ash, it looked untouched, clean, waiting. Elias frowned. He had seen many weapons on the battlefield, but nothing like this. This was not a common Varkesh blade. It felt older, important. He cleared the rubble away and lifted it. The moment his fingers wrapped around the hilt, warmth spread through his palm, not heat, something deeper, like a steady pulse, slow and calm, matching his heartbeat. Elias froze, expecting pain or some kind of reaction. Nothing happened. He exhaled slowly. Well, he muttered to himself, that's strange. He had seen drawings like this once in an old archive, precursor symbols, ancient, legendary. Elias swallowed. If this really was what he thought it was, then it did not belong in the dirt. He slid the sword into a length of cloth and secured it to his back. He had no intention of keeping it. Some things were too dangerous to be lost or stolen. Varkesh patrol drones buzzed overhead as he made his way toward the command spire at the center of the city. The Dominion's Queen Commander was still planetside, overseeing the final occupation. Elias knew this because everyone knew this. Zarketh did not leave a conquered world until every last symbol of resistance had been crushed. The spire rose above the ruins like a spear aimed at the sky. Alien banners hung from its sides, marked with the Dominion's jagged crest. Elias approached openly, hands visible, posture calm. He had learned long ago that fear excited the Varkesh. Calm confused them. At the outer gates, 2 armored warriors blocked his path. They were massive, towering over him, their segmented armor dark red and black. Their eyes glowed faintly behind angular helmets. "State your purpose, human," one of them growled through a translator. "I'm returning something that was lost," Elias said simply. The warriors glanced at each other. One of them laughed, a harsh clicking sound. "Humans steal even from battlefields now." Still, after scanning him and confirming he carried no weapons, at least none they recognized, they allowed him through. To them he was harmless, just another fragile human who did not know when to kneel. Inside the spire, the air was cold and clean, far removed from the destruction outside. Alien technology hummed softly through the walls. Elias was escorted through long halls until they reached a massive chamber. Queen Commander Zarketh stood at its center. She was taller than most of her kind, her armor decorated with etched symbols of conquest. A long cloak flowed behind her, made from the banners of defeated enemies. Her presence filled the room, heavy and commanding. Around her stood elite warriors, silent and alert. Zarketh turned her gaze on Elias. "This world burns," she said calmly. "Why does a human stand before me unafraid? My sword is not missing. It does not allow itself to be taken." The air grew heavy, charged with unseen energy. The Varkesh warriors stepped back in shock. "That is not possible," one of them whispered. Zarketh staggered slightly, her grip tightening. The blade did not settle. It vibrated, resisting her hold as if confused. Elias instinctively stepped forward. "Careful," he said. "It doesn't seem angry." "Just active." Elite warriors who had never retreated from battle took another step back. "This cannot be," Zarketh said, her voice tight. "You are nothing, a scavenger, a human." Somewhere deep within the spire, ancient systems stirred, waking from a sleep that had lasted longer than empires. And for the first time in generations, the Varkesh Dominion felt something they had erased from their history: uncertainty. The golden light from the sword filled the chamber, stretching over walls and floor like molten sunlight. Ilias stood still, unsure what to do, but aware that nothing in the Dominion's history had ever prepared anyone for this. The sword did not hum with aggression, nor did it strike out. It simply glowed, alive in a way that demanded attention. The air tasted thick and metallic, and every breath carried the tension of centuries of forgotten knowledge. Zarketh tightened her grip on the blade, but it resisted her like a living thing with a mind of its own. It twisted slightly, slipping from her hands in a way that was impossible for a human, or even a Varkesh, to ignore. Her warriors shifted, their armor clinking, unease spreading among them. Fear was a word the Dominion had long forgotten. Now it came back to them, unfamiliar and sharp. "Step back," Ilias said quietly. "I don't want to hurt anyone." The light flowed from him as much as from the metal, tracing invisible paths across the chamber and illuminating alien eyes wide with disbelief. Zarketh's voice broke the silence. "Human, what are you?" Her tone was both angry and curious, the combination of emotions creating a strange tension in the room. "No one controls this blade except my bloodline. Every warrior knows it." "Every enemy knows it. How?" She could not finish the question. Words failed her as the golden light flickered, reaching into corners she had not noticed, brushing over walls lined with trophies of conquered worlds. Ilias did not answer. He only lifted the sword slightly, testing the weight and balance. The hum rose in response, a deep resonant vibration that made the floor beneath their feet tremble. Symbols flared along the blade, sharp and precise, ancient carvings that had not been activated in countless centuries. And yet they moved with purpose, aligning themselves as if acknowledging the human before them. A murmur ran through the warriors behind Zarketh. These were not untrained soldiers, they were elite, veterans of countless campaigns. Yet here they were, stepping back, unease written in the stiff lines of their posture. Some whispered to each other, words they did not believe aloud, as if speaking them could make reality change. It should not react to him. It simply existed, powerful in a way that did not require violence. Ilias could feel its energy, faint pulses through his arm, but not pain. The glow seemed to read him, understanding his intent before he even consciously formed it. And that understanding sent a ripple through the Dominion's warriors, teaching them fear for the first time in their lives. Zarketh finally found her voice. "Why are you not afraid?" Her tone was sharp, commanding, but beneath it was a thread of something else, awe, confusion, and growing dread. She had faced countless enemies, conquered entire worlds, and yet here, standing before a single human, she felt exposed, powerless in a way she had never imagined. "I don't know," Ilias said honestly. "I'm not trying to fight. I only wanted to return what was lost." The realization struck Zarketh like a blow. Her warriors had always obeyed strength and authority, feared her will, and followed her commands without question. But here, in front of a human who did not seek to conquer, the blade had recognized something different. Something she could not control, something she could not fight. The sword flared suddenly, brighter, sending shadows racing across the walls of the chamber. The light was no longer soft and golden. It sharpened, highlighting each warrior's face, showing their fear in every flicker. Some warriors instinctively stepped back, their instincts screaming that this was not a weapon to be faced. Even the most battle-hardened began to waver, their confidence cracking under the weight of something greater than force. Zarketh staggered slightly, her grip on the sword faltering. The hum rose again, low and commanding, resonating deep in the bones of everyone present. It was not a song of war, it was a song of judgment. Every vibration carried the message that dominance and fear were not the only measures of power. A single human, calm and patient, could trigger forces that centuries of conquest had never awakened. One of the Varkesh warriors, the largest among them, stepped forward as if to challenge Ilias. The sword reacted immediately, its light flaring toward him, not in attack, but in warning. The warrior froze, his movements stiffening, and then he slowly withdrew, unwilling to face the unknown. Whispers ran through the room. "It obeys him, it obeys a human." The words were repeated, disbelief echoing in hushed tones. Ilias felt the pressure of their stares, the weight of history pressing on him. He had not asked for this. He had not sought to challenge the Dominion. All he had wanted was to honor a duty, returning a weapon to its rightful owner. And yet, in doing so, he had awakened something that no one could ignore. Something that reminded the galaxy that humans were not as weak or insignificant as they had believed. Zarketh dropped to one knee, not in surrender, but in shock. Her elite warriors, proud and unyielding, backed away, some refusing to look directly at him. The room was filled with a strange energy, a hum that seemed to carry memory and intention both. Ilias understood only fragments of it, images flickering behind his closed eyelids, visions of ancient humans, standing beside forces older than empires, wielding relics that shaped galaxies. He blinked and the visions were gone, leaving only a sense of awe and responsibility. "I do not understand this," Zarketh said finally, voice trembling. "How can a human awaken it? How can it respond to your touch?" "I never tried to fight." Ilias did not feel power in the way the Dominion imagined it. He felt responsibility, awareness, and a deep connection to something far larger than himself. The atmosphere in the chamber had shifted. The Varkesh warriors, trained to fear nothing, were now cautious, uncertain. Their queen, invincible in her own eyes, felt the first tremor of fear since she had ascended. Ilias noticed this not as triumph, but as clarity. The blade was not meant for conquest. It was meant to protect, to choose, and to awaken awareness in those who had long forgotten humility. Zarketh rose slowly, her posture tense. "If this weapon obeys you," she said, her voice low, "then everything we believed, everything I have built, is meaningless." Words would not suffice. The glow from the sword spoke louder than anything he could say. Its energy radiated calm, restraint, and an undeniable truth. Humanity had been underestimated. For centuries, the galaxy had written them off as weak, fragile, inconsequential. And yet, here was a single human, unarmed in intent, holding the key to forces the Dominion had never understood. Outside the chamber, the city remained quiet except for distant alarms and the faint hum of alien engines. Inside, the silence was different. It was alive, charged with something no one present could name, yet everyone could feel. Ilias took a small step back, careful not to provoke the sword, careful not to threaten the queen or her warriors. He had no desire for violence, only for completion of a duty. The largest Varkesh warrior, unable to resist his instincts, reached for a weapon. The sword reacted instantly, not with attack, but with warning. A sharp flare of light extended toward him, forcing him to stop, frozen in place. Others glanced around, uncertain, hesitant. What they had relied upon for millennia, strength, fear, authority, was meaningless against this human. Zarketh's eyes met Ilias' searching for intent. "You are not here to fight," she said, "and yet you are more powerful than any soldier I command." Her voice carried awe, fear, and confusion all at once. How is this possible?" He only knew he had done what he came to do. He had returned the sword. That simple act had awakened something the galaxy had forgotten, something older than fear, older than conquest. And for the first time, the Dominion understood a lesson humans had carried quietly for centuries. Restraint could be stronger than force. The sword's glow dimmed slightly, though it remained luminous, casting shadows that danced across alien faces. Ilias lowered it carefully, returning it to Zarketh's hands, not claiming it, not wielding it. The gesture was simple, yet profound. The queen felt its weight, its judgment, and the realization that nothing she had built could command it. In that moment, the room shifted. The hum of ancient energy faded, leaving a quiet tension. The Dominion's warriors stared at Ilias as if seeing him for the first time, not as a human, fragile and weak, but as something other. A reminder that the galaxy had underestimated a species that had survived and adapted against impossible odds. And Ilias, standing quietly, held nothing but a simple truth in his calm demeanor. He had acted with honor, and that alone had changed everything. Ilias stepped back as the glow of the sword gradually softened, though it still radiated a faint golden light. The chamber felt alive in a way he could not explain, as if the air itself acknowledged his presence. Zarketh still held the blade, though her fingers trembled slightly. Her warriors, proud and disciplined, stood frozen, unsure whether to advance, retreat, or speak. The room seemed suspended in time, caught between disbelief and fear. Ilias looked at the symbols etched along the sword. They had stopped moving, but he felt their meaning brushing against his mind, faint images, fragments of memory older than any written history. He did not understand them fully, but he knew they were meant to be understood by one who could wield them not for war, but for judgment, for guidance. Zarketh finally spoke, her voice quieter now, tinged with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "What is this weapon? What power lies within it?" Humans, his species, had stood beside the precursors, the architects of the galaxy's greatest technology. They had been partners, not servants, protectors, not conquerors. Ilias gasped. He had heard stories in fragments from old archives, myths whispered by scholars and hidden records, but he had never imagined them true. Humans, the stories said, were once the stewards of relics like this sword. Guardians of forces the galaxy no longer understood. He blinked, shaking his head as the visions faded. The weight of what he had touched pressed on him, a quiet responsibility more powerful than any weapon or army. The sword had chosen him, not for conquest, not for battle, but for understanding, for balance. Zarketh's eyes were sharp now, her gaze piercing, searching for meaning. "You a human, you awaken it." One of the Varkesh warriors stepped forward, massive, armored in black and red. His voice was low, cautious. "You should not be here, human. This is not for your kind." Even the queen, observing, could see the fear in the eyes of her warriors. Centuries of conquest, unbroken discipline, shattered by a single human's presence. Elias swallowed. "I don't want to fight. I only wanted to do what was right." The Varkesh had never known authority like this. It was calm, it was unyielding, it was understanding. Zarketh's voice was low, more to herself than to him. "What are you?" Humans had been the custodians, the guides, the hidden force in the galaxy, and then, for reasons he did not yet understand, they had stepped back. They had erased themselves from memory, allowed the galaxy to forget them, to underestimate them. The realization weighed on Elias. I think humans were never meant to fight for conquest," he said slowly. "We were meant to guide, to protect, to make sure power doesn't fall into hands that cannot handle it. I think this sword knows that balance better than anyone else here. If you are right, then everything I believed, everything I built, is meaningless." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "All these victories, all this power, and it is nothing compared to what you hold." And that connection, quiet and steady, carried more weight than all the Dominion's armies combined. The hum from the sword rose again, filling the chamber. The symbols along its length glowed brighter, projecting light across the walls and floors. Elias could sense intelligence, systems designed for a purpose far older than the Dominion itself. It did not belong to anyone claiming power through fear. It belonged to someone who understood restraint, who could hold back when all others would push forward. A faint vibration ran through the floor. Not mechanical, not natural. It was subtle, deep in the bones, a reminder that the sword was not simply a weapon. It was a living memory, a guide for those who could carry its responsibility. Elias' heart beat with it, steady and calm, a rhythm that matched the pulse of ancient knowledge. One of the largest warriors, still hesitant, stepped closer again, his hand hovering over his weapon. The sword flared sharply, and he froze, unable to move. The others watched in silence, realizing that force alone would not dictate this encounter. Every instinct they had was useless against this calm, this understanding, this presence. Zarketh took a slow step forward, studying Elias. "I have conquered planets, I have faced armies that would crush worlds, and yet I see no threat in you. I see only balance. How is this possible?" And it recognized that. And now, faced with calm, restraint, and understanding, their foundation felt fragile. Zarketh's eyes softened, though her posture remained rigid. "And the human race, you have waited all this time." It was not audible, but they all felt it. Uncertainty, the first ripple of doubt that had never touched them before. Elias, standing quietly, holding nothing but the truth, had done something no army, no weapon, no empire had ever accomplished. The sword pulsed once more, steady and bright. The chamber seemed to recognize Elias, a human, not as weak, but as a bearer of forgotten legacy. Zarketh felt it too, a quiet truth she could not deny. All her victories, all her conquests, all her pride, paled in comparison to this one act of restraint. The queen took a slow breath. "Then, if what you say is true, the galaxy has been blind." Her voice was soft now, reflective. "Blind to humans, blind to what they can do, blind to what they once were." The sword glowed brighter still, as if affirming his unspoken thoughts. Humans had not been absent. They had only hidden, allowing others to underestimate them. And now, in this chamber filled with the Dominion's elite, the galaxy would begin to remember. Outside, the city remained quiet, smoke drifting lazily across the ruins. Inside, the chamber hummed with a different kind of energy, older than the Dominion, older than empires. It was knowledge. It was judgment. It was the quiet, steady presence of a species long forgotten but never defeated. Elias lowered the sword slightly, careful not to provoke it further. He had no desire for dominance, for power, or for conquest. He only wanted to fulfill a duty, to return what had been lost. Yet in doing so, he had awakened more than just a weapon. He had awakened history, a memory, a force the galaxy had underestimated for centuries. The Varkesh warriors, still uneasy, whispered among themselves, not daring to speak loudly. Their queen, usually proud and unshakable, studied him with a mixture of fear and awe. Elias realized for the first time that humanity's true strength was never in brute force, but in understanding, restraint, and the courage to act without expectation. The sword pulsed one final time, golden light bathing the chamber in warmth, and then it began to settle as if acknowledging Ilia's intent. It was no longer aggressive, no longer warning. It had recognized him not as a human, not as a soldier, but as a bearer of balance, a reminder of a legacy long forgotten. Zarketh's voice broke the silence again. "Perhaps we have misjudged your kind. We were meant to guide, to protect, to wait, and now the time has come." But never before had they faced a human who did not fight to destroy, yet could change the course of empires with a single act of honesty and calm. The sword pulsed softly, as if in agreement. Ilias exhaled, feeling the weight of what had occurred. He had returned the sword, and in doing so, reminded the galaxy that humans were not weak, insignificant, or irrelevant. They were quiet, patient, and wise beyond the measure of empires. And sometimes the smallest acts, done with care and understanding, carried the greatest power of all. The moment Ilias lowered the sword, the golden light dimmed but did not vanish. It remained steady, a quiet heartbeat in the room, signaling that it had chosen to stay active under his presence. The Varkesh warriors shifted uneasily, their confidence broken, their sense of control slipping with each passing second. Their queen commander, Zarketh, still held the blade, but her grip was tense, and her eyes were fixed on Ilias, filled with both fear and fascination. For centuries, she had ruled with absolute authority. She had crushed rebellions, commanded fleets, and struck fear into entire populations. Yet here, in the center of her command spire, she felt powerless. Not because Ilias had threatened her, not because he had fought her, but because he had awakened something she could not touch, could not command. Something older than fear, stronger than armies. Ilias took a careful step forward. His calm presence seemed to radiate through the chamber. He did not raise the sword, nor did he make any aggressive move. He only walked slowly, deliberately, showing no sign of intimidation or desire for dominance. The light from the blade pulsed gently with each step, synchronizing with his heartbeat. Zarketh's voice broke the silence. "Human, you do not understand. This weapon belongs to my bloodline. No one else should even touch it." It was as though the blade was affirming his words, communicating without sound that he acted with honesty and purpose. A large warrior at the edge of the room stepped forward. His armor glinted in the sword's golden light, and his voice was steady but wary. "You have no right to interfere, human. Step aside. I am correcting what has been lost." It carried judgment. Zarketh's eyes widened. "Impossible," she exclaimed. "It should obey me. Nothing has ever resisted my will. A weak species, unworthy of wielding, of understanding any power." The ancient systems hidden within the blade activated subtly, projecting energy that neither Ilias nor the Varkesh fully understood. The largest warrior, emboldened by his training, lunged forward, his weapon raised. The sword's glow intensified instantly, forming a radiant barrier that stopped him mid-step. He froze, unable to move, his muscles rigid as though the blade itself had decided the motion unacceptable. His companions gasped, taking instinctive steps back, realizing that strength and aggression meant nothing against this human. Zarketh's face went pale. She had fought countless opponents, faced armies larger than worlds, and yet none of her experience could prepare her for this. Her eyes darted to Ilias, then to the sword, then back to her frozen warriors. She saw the truth finally. The weapon did not recognize lineage or conquest. It recognized purpose, restraint, and understanding. The queen took a slow, careful step forward. "Then, this means what I feared, that I have been blind. That all these years of conquest, all these victories, they mean nothing if a human can awaken this blade." Symbols along the blade shifted, projecting faint holographic images only Ilias could perceive. Ancient humans stood beside colossal alien constructs, wielding weapons and devices of incredible complexity, maintaining balance in the galaxy. Ilias glimpsed fleets that moved with precision beyond imagination, guided not by domination, but by strategy and judgment. Humans had not been weak, they had been patient, hidden guardians of knowledge the galaxy had forgotten. Zarketh's voice was barely audible. "So, you are telling me humans were never meant to fight for power. We only acted when balance demanded it." One of the warriors stepped forward cautiously, trying to understand. "If this human can awaken it, what does that mean for us, for the Dominion? And yet this human stands here untouched, unafraid, and the sword obeys him instead of me." The very air in the room seemed to shift under the sword's influence, teaching the Dominion warriors a lesson they had never been forced to learn. Restraint, calm, and wisdom could hold more power than their armies had ever achieved. Elias breathed slowly, aware of the weight of the moment. He had not come seeking to command, to conquer, or to fight. He had only come to return a lost weapon. Yet the galaxy in this chamber was seeing something it had long forgotten. Humans were not to be underestimated. Humans were not weak. They carried patience, understanding, and wisdom that even the mightiest alien could not match. Zarketh lowered the blade slightly, studying Elias carefully. And yet, you are only one human. How can you carry such authority? How can your species hold the balance of the galaxy? It spoke of judgment, responsibility, and the weight of actions taken with care. Zarketh took another step forward, her hands gripping the sword loosely now. Then, if this is true, my empire is fragile. My victories mean little. Everything I built, all the power I wielded, and it does not matter against one human who acts with honor. It does not matter because you relied on fear and force, not balance and understanding. That is all. And yet they understood instinctively. Strength alone could not overcome this. Zarketh's voice was low, reflective, almost admiring. Then, humanity has been underestimated, forgotten, and yet one human can challenge all that I have built simply by acting rightly. Sometimes the smallest acts, done with honesty and care, hold more power than empires. Yet here, standing calmly, acting only with integrity, Elias had demonstrated a power no one could teach or manufacture. The sword pulsed gently, the golden glow stabilizing. Elias did not raise it. He only held it lightly, aware that restraint mattered more than dominance. The queen and her warriors stared, unable to speak, unable to act. They were no longer rulers in this chamber. They were witnesses. Witnesses to the quiet strength of a species long forgotten but never defeated. Zarketh finally spoke again, her voice steady but low. Then, perhaps we have misjudged humans. But now you will remember. She ruled now in the presence of something older, wiser, and beyond her control. Elias exhaled, feeling the quiet weight of history in the chamber. He had returned the sword, fulfilled his duty, and reminded the galaxy of humanity's place, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as keepers of balance. And that realization, simple yet profound, had changed everything. The chamber remained silent, filled with the soft glow of the sword and the quiet understanding that some forces could not be dominated. Some powers required respect, wisdom, and restraint. And humanity, in Elias' calm act, had demonstrated those qualities in a way the galaxy would never forget. The chamber was quiet now, except for the soft pulse of golden light flowing from the sword. Elias stood at its center, feeling its warmth, its calm authority, as if it had chosen him not just to hold it, but to understand it. The Varkesh warriors still lingered, their movements hesitant, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. Even their queen, Zarketh, remained rooted to the spot, gripping the blade loosely in her hands. The moment had shifted something fundamental. It was no longer a room of conquerors, it was a room of witnesses. Elias exhaled slowly. He had come here simply to return a lost weapon, not to claim power, not to dominate, and certainly not to destroy. Yet the presence of the sword and the way it responded to him had already done far more than any act of war ever could. It had reminded the galaxy that humans were not weak, not insignificant, and not to be underestimated. That realization alone made the Varkesh uneasy. Zarketh's eyes narrowed. You have power, she said finally, her voice tight, measured. Not strength, not armies, but something else, something I cannot command. And it responds to balance, to intent, to understanding. I have no desire to control it beyond returning it safely. Recognition that they had underestimated a species that they believed small, weak, and irrelevant. One warrior stepped forward, his armor clinking lightly. If what you say is true, human, if this weapon obeys you, what does that mean for the Dominion? And it means that humans are not conquerors. We are guides, protectors, and witnesses to balance. That is all. For the first time in history, the Dominion felt powerless not because they were weak, but because their philosophy of fear and dominance was being confronted by something older, wiser, and beyond their control. Zarketh's hands tightened around the sword. You do not seek to rule. You do not seek to destroy. Yet you hold more influence here than any army I command. Consoles flashed, engines hummed faintly, and ancient energy lines pulsed through the walls. The Varkesh warriors glanced at each other, confusion and alarm crossing their faces. Their empire had been built on stolen technology, on weapons they could never fully control. And now that hidden truth was awakening under the hands of a single human who meant no harm. Zarketh's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. Then, everything we have done, all the worlds we have conquered, it means nothing against this truth. The faint outline of ships, weapons, and fortified cities across the planet flickered into view, visible only to Elias. Systems long thought dormant were now online, silently responding to the sword. It was a gentle, deliberate awakening, not destruction. The sword had activated what the Dominion had stolen but never mastered. Zarketh took a step back, her knees weak, her eyes wide. What are you doing?" The Dominion's empire, built on fear and force, was unraveling not through attack, but through the simple awakening of knowledge and restraint. The warriors in the chamber began to shift nervously, whispers growing louder. "It obeys him, a human, it recognizes balance." The words trailed off into shocked silence. Even the largest, most confident soldiers, veterans of countless wars, found themselves hesitating, unsure how to proceed. Strength meant nothing against something they could not understand. Zarketh lowered the sword slightly. "Then, it chooses not violence but judgment. And you are chosen because you understand it, because you do not fight for conquest." The energy flowed outward, reaching the walls, the floors, the figures of the Varkesh warriors, and extending even beyond the spire itself. Systems across the planet reacted subtly, awakening in harmony rather than conflict. Weapons became inert, engines quieted, and communications faltered as if the universe itself paused to acknowledge the moment. Zarketh stepped back fully now, the sword in her hands trembling slightly. She had ruled through fear and dominance her entire life. And yet here, a human who had done nothing aggressive, nothing hostile, had caused more upheaval than any war she had led. Her empire had fallen not by force, but by the awakening of restraint and wisdom, guided by a species she had long dismissed. Elias took a deep breath, aware of the ripple his presence had created. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel powerful. He felt responsibility. He felt the weight of history pressing upon him, reminding him of the centuries his species had quietly endured, observing, surviving, and waiting. Humans were not conquerors, but their patience and clarity now held sway where empires had failed. One of the warriors, still unsure, stepped forward cautiously. "Human, if what you say is true and your kind has been forgotten, then why now? Why reveal yourselves in this moment?" Humans do not act for conquest, but when the universe itself needs correction, we act with clarity, restraint, and purpose. Fear had entered their hearts, not as terror of harm, but as awareness of limitation. Zarketh lowered the sword entirely, finally letting it rest lightly in her hands. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the tension leaving her body. She had always believed herself unstoppable, yet a single human, acting with honesty and purpose, had reminded her of the fragility of her empire. "Then what do we do now?" she asked quietly. "You do nothing," Elias replied. "The sword chooses judgment, not destruction. You only need to understand and to act wisely from this point forward." The Varkesh warriors looked to one another, uncertainty and fear still lingering, but the lesson was clear. The human had done what no army, no empire, and no weapon could do. He had restored balance. He had awakened knowledge forgotten for centuries. Outside, the city remained quiet, smoke drifting lazily from distant ruins. The Dominion's fleets fell into inactivity. Outposts ceased their broadcasts. Even the mightiest warships, ready to dominate worlds, waited silently as if sensing the shift in authority. Elias turned toward Zarketh. "Your empire was built on fear. It cannot survive in this way. But that does not mean your species is defeated. It means you have a choice. You can rebuild wisely, guided by understanding rather than terror." "We do not conquer," he said quietly. "We guide, we protect, and we restore. That is all humanity asks." And Elias, calm and steady, reminded them with every quiet breath, true strength is not in force, but in restraint, wisdom, and the courage to act rightly. The Varkesh warriors, even the most seasoned and proud, began to step back. They left the chamber quietly, each taking the lesson with them. If a human can act with such clarity and purpose, the universe itself may shift under their presence. And for the first time, even Zarketh felt it, the realization that humans, patient, clever, and restrained, had the power to change the galaxy without ever drawing a weapon. Elias took a step back, lowering his head slightly in respect. He had done what he came to do. He had returned the sword, restored a forgotten legacy, and reminded the galaxy that humans were not to be ignored. The Dominion's empire remained, but it had been changed. The balance had shifted. And from that day forward, every warrior in the galaxy would know that if a human calmly returned something they had stolen, it meant more than fear or strength. It meant that the reckoning had arrived. The sword's light pulsed gently one final time, steady, warm, and alive, marking the quiet triumph of patience, wisdom, and the enduring legacy of a species long forgotten, but never defeated. Humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer hidden. It was a force not of war, but of balance, judgment, and understanding, and the universe would never forget.